organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience in China. My name is Sophia Briskin, and I will be your host for today. What an absolutely incredible journey we have taken over the course of the past 5 webinars. Welcome to our distinguished speakers for today, who will be joining us in a little while for a live Q&A. For our regular viewers, welcome back. It is great to have you with us. And for those who are joining us for the first time, I look forward to spending the next 2.5 hours sharing this platform with you. And of course, a big welcome to our live stream audience watching via the NTD TV and Epoch Times platforms. To date, there have been close to 400,000 views across multiple channels of this summit. While this is a difficult topic to fathom, the pressing need for a global solution has never been more urgent. The inspiration for this World Summit was simple. First, we felt it was vital to convey a clear message to the world that human beings cannot be treated as disposable commodities, subjected to inhumane forced organ removal. And second, that a universal framework is required to combat these horrific crimes. In a little while, Universal Declaration on Combating and Preventing Forced Organ Harvesting will be formally launched. Through this international document, we, the people of the 21st century, will be able to proclaim our determination to stop the most diabolical atrocity humankind has seen in this century. The crime of forced organ harvesting from living people carried out by the Chinese Communist Party cannot continue. Don't go anywhere. Stay till the end to learn how you will be able to be part of this historical process. Let me take this moment to briefly explain the proceedings for today. After the formal presentations of our speakers, the Universal Declaration will be launched by the 5 co-hosting NGOs. Following that, an announcement, our registered audience will join a live Q&A session with the presenters. And now, please allow me to once again welcome our expert panel for today's concluding session. They will discuss the importance of policy and legislative measures to address forced organ harvesting crimes. It is a crucial element in this conversation. China's continual denial of the atrocities on one side and the lack of condemnation from the West on the other only further creates a perpetual cycle of complicity. At the same time, we are inspired by the courage of those who take steps to propose and implement much needed changes. Without further ado, let's welcome our first guest speaker for today. We are honored to have with us Professor Arthur Caplan. He is a renowned professor and researcher of medical ethics, who is widely published and an expert on the topic of ethics in transplant medicine. Dr. Caplan is head of the Division of Bioethics at New York University, Langone Medical Center. Professor Caplan initiated a movement to decline journal articles from China which did not pass ethical standards. Today, we will discuss the ethical considerations of organ sourcing in state-sponsored forced organ harvesting.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening to my presentation on this very important subject. China continues to be kind of the great white whale of organ donation. Many people around the world want to bring China back into the transplant community, into the medical community, into the scientific community. But there continue to be serious ethical problems with transplantation in China that must be addressed before that can happen. China has managed to achieve extraordinary rates of growth in hospital-based organ procurement and in doing transplants over the past 25 years. Just incredible growth. That makes them, if not the number one, then certainly the number two transplant nation in the world. But the problem is the data reported from China on organ donation looks too good to be true. A number of studies have just said that what is publicly available on organ donation looks like it is too unbelievably true to account for the source of all organs. And there still remains insufficient transparency and verification of organ procurement practices in China. Chinese authorities, in fact, sometimes do refer to transplant data there as a state secret. That is simply unacceptable, given what we know about the need for an independent scientific examination, an independent legal examination of China's ambitious program for organ transplantation and efforts at reform. So what we can conclude at present is there has been change, but the current voluntary system to get organs seems to be operating alongside the continued use of non-voluntary donors, most plausibly prisoners and people who thus are misclassified both as prisoners and as voluntary donors in order to maintain the pace at which China is performing transplants. So one issue is, who's a prisoner? And in China, a lot of people are categorized as prisoners for reasons that are just not acceptable by any measure of judicial or legal standards. Prisoners are classified as being in that category because of their ethnicity, their race, their tribal customs, their religious or spiritual practices. We know there are huge numbers of prisoners in what are so-called educational reform camps, concentration camps in China, and many, many other people have been sentenced to prison for violating no real laws, for harming no one, but simply because they have a particular religious or spiritual point of view. Well, you can't use those people as organ donors upon death because they are misclassified as prisoners and should not be in that category. And there is no reason to think that they are not currently being used. And that is morally unacceptable, morally bogus. Also, in my opinion, prisoners can't give consent to donation post their deaths when they're in a corrupt system, when their legal system is broken. And that does appear to be true, sadly, in China. So the idea that prisoners who may be executed for who knows what reason are giving voluntary consent to organ donation after they die is ludicrous. Voluntary consent is almost impossible to obtain for post-mortem donation in a prison context, too coercive, too exploitative. Excuse me. Voluntary consent is almost impossible to obtain in any prison system because of the pressure on prisoners, because of the inherent coercive nature of the environment. So if you add the two together, who is considered a prisoner, which is bogus in the Chinese system, and is voluntary consent after death possible in a Chinese prison, jail, or camp setting, which it isn't. And if these sources of organs still are playing a big role in how China is able to maintain its steady growth in doing transplants, well, some reforms have occurred, but there's still a reliance on an immoral system, partly fueling the supply of organs. Prisoners should not be being used. Consent is not anything but a fig leaf. We're in a situation where it is not time to give up on pressing for further reform and further protection of those involved in organ donation, organ procurement in China. We can't yet bring Chinese transplant and Chinese medicine and science into the world community until those reforms occur. Thank you for watching.
Thank you, Professor Kaplan. Next, from Chile, we are delighted to welcome Mr. Jaime Naranjo Ortiz. Mr. Naranjo is a Chilean academic and politician and member of Parliament. He is the former Vice President of the Chamber of Deputies and former Vice President of the Senate. He is the recipient of numerous awards, including the National Human Rights Prize and Light and Memory Award from the Jewish community. As we endeavour to develop a universal framework to combat forced organ harvesting, our next speaker will give a guide for some proposed steps.
El consentimiento es la piedra angular ética de toda intervención médica. Compete a las autoridades de cada país definir, de conformidad con las normas éticas internacionales, el proceso de obtención y registro del consentimiento relativo a la donación de células, tejidos y órganos, el modo en que se organiza la obtención de órganos en su país y la función práctica del consentimiento como salvaguardia contra los abusos y las infracciones de seguridad. Los médicos que ya han determinado la muerte de un donante potencial no deberán participar directamente en la extracción de células, tejidos u órganos de ese donante, ni en los procedimientos subsiguientes de trasplante, ni ocuparse de la asistencia a los receptores previstos de esa célula, tejidos y órganos. El tráfico de órganos humanos vulnera la dignidad humana y el derecho a la vida y constituye una grave amenaza para la salud pública. Para la erradicación del tráfico de órganos es imprescindible que las legislaciones nacionales y el derecho internacional público tipifiquen penalmente y sancionen la extracción ilícita de órganos de donantes vivos o muertos, que se regule la extracción, el decomiso y embargo y la cooperación internacional. El trasplante quirúrgico de órganos humanos de donantes fallecidos o vivos a personas enfermas o moribundas empezó después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial. En los últimos 50 años, el trasplante de células, tejidos y órganos humanos se ha convertido en una práctica mundial que ha alargado la duración y mejorado enormemente la calidad de cientos de miles de vidas. Gracias a la constante mejora de la tecnología médica, sobre todo en relación con el rechazo de tejidos y órganos, se ha producido un aumento de la demanda de estos, que siempre ha sido superior a la oferta, a pesar del notable aumento de la donación de órganos de personas fallecidas y del aumento de las donaciones de personas vivas en los últimos años. La escasez de órganos disponibles no solo ha llevado a muchos países a elaborar procedimientos y sistemas destinados a aumentar la oferta, sino que también ha estimulado el tráfico comercial de órganos humanos, sobre todo de donantes vivos, no emparentados con los receptores. Las pruebas de la existencia de este comercio ilegal y del tráfico de seres humanos que lo acompaña se han hecho más evidentes en los últimos decenios. Tenemos el caso de China. La organización y la sociedad del trasplante estipulan que, comillas, el uso de prisioneros en cualquier país que tenga pena de muerte viola los estándares éticos médicos, dado que los prisioneros no pueden dar su libre consentimiento, cierre comillas. El hecho de que la pena de muerte es aplicada en China continental ha supuesto que su sistema de trasplante de órganos sea puesto en duda por muchos expertos de la sociedad médica. Las 6 inspecciones a hospitales en China en el año 2015, realizadas por organismos internacionales, fueron programadas de antemano y ninguna de las visitas autorizadas se realizó en un centro de trasplante activo. En junio del año 2016, un informe elaborado por diversos científicos desveló que el número de órganos que se trasplantan al año en China se situaría entre los 60.000 y 100.000, números muy lejanos a los 10.000 que sostiene el régimen chino. Esta discrepancia en el número de trasplantes anuales, comillas, se compone por órganos de presos ejecutados, muchos de esos presos de conciencia encerrados por sus creencias religiosas o políticas, cierre comillas. Expertos en trasplante afirman que las prácticas de extracción forzada de órganos no ha cesado en la actualidad, a pesar de las promesas dadas por China desde el año 2014. Los expertos de las Naciones Unidas denuncian la extirpación de órganos en China, cuentan con un mandato de la ONU, pero no hablan en nombre de la institución. Aseguran estar extremadamente alarmados con las informaciones que disponen. De acuerdo con las denuncias recibidas, los órganos extraídos con mayor frecuencia a los presos son corazones, riñones, hígados, córneas y a veces trozos de hígado. Desde hace mucho tiempo, miembros de la organización Falun Gong acusan al gigante asiático de practicar la extracción forzada de órganos a sus seguidores, que están encarcelados. De acuerdo a la tradición china, cuando una persona muere, es enterrada sin mutilaciones y muy pocos chinos aceptan la extirpación de órganos. Beijing siempre ha negado rotundamente estas acusaciones. La sustracción forzada de órganos en China parecen estar dirigidas a miembros de minorías étnicas, lingüísticas o religiosas determinadas que se encuentran detenidos, y muy a medida sin que se les explique las razones de su arresto o sin ninguna orden de tal, dicen los expertos. Además señalan que este asunto ya fue planteado con anterioridad a Beijing por expertos en derechos humanos en la ONU desde el año 2006 a la fecha, sin éxito. Las autoridades chinas niegan una y otra vez estas denuncias y acusan a los expertos de las Naciones Unidas de calumniar a su país. Además, aseguraron que los expertos de la ONU carecen de criterio y de razonamientos rudimentarios y que han caído en la desinformación de fuerzas separatistas anti-China y del movimiento Falun Gong. ¿Qué es lo que proponemos para evitar el comercio internacional de órganos y particularmente la vulneración de los derechos humanos que ocurren en determinados países? Primero, que la comunidad internacional y particularmente las Naciones Unidas, a través del Alto Comisionado para los Derechos Humanos, deben enviar una misión a China para investigar la ocurrencia de prácticas de extracción forzada de órganos. Segundo, del mismo modo, la Organización Mundial de la Salud debe monitorear a las autoridades estatales de salud china para evitar el cumplimiento, para verificar el cumplimiento de los principios rectores sobre el trasplante de células, tejidos y órganos humanos. Tercero, asimismo, la comunidad internacional debiera propiciar la suscripción de todas las naciones que integran la ONU, del Convenio contra el Tráfico de Órganos, del Consejo de Europa, abierto para firmar y ratificar desde marzo del año 2015 en Santiago de Compostela. Es el primer instrumento internacional vinculante dedicado exclusivamente a la lucha contra el tráfico de órganos. Cuarto, este convenio internacional obliga a las partes que lo ratifiquen a tipificar como delito, con arreglo a su derecho interno, la extracción si se ha cometido intencionalmente de órganos humanos de donantes vivos o muertos. Quinto, debe estimularse la cooperación internacional para la persecución de los delitos de extirpación y tráfico de órganos en materia de investigación, extradición, decomiso y embargo. Sexto, estimular que los parlamentos nacionales aprueben resoluciones condenando la extracción ilícita de órganos y tejidos humanos y el tráfico de los mismos en el mundo y en particular en China. Y finalmente, propiciar la adopción de una declaración universal, la extracción ilícita de órganos y el tráfico de aquellos. Creo que la comunidad internacional no puede quedar indiferente a lo que estamos asistiendo estos últimos años, como es el tráfico ilegal de órganos. Creo que los derechos de las personas, los derechos humanos fundamentales, son justamente respetar su dignidad. No podemos guardar silencio, no podemos ser indiferentes a lo que está ocurriendo en el campo internacional y particularmente en China en relación al tráfico ilegal de órganos. Por eso debemos actuar unidos para ganar esta batalla tan desigual que estamos enfrentando.
Thank you for outlining such important steps, Mr. Naranjo, to combat forced organ harvesting. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Elisabetta Zamparuti from Italy. Ms. Zamparuti is a lawyer, member of the Committee for the Prevention of Torture on the Council of Europe, former member of Italian Parliament and treasurer of Hands Off Cain, an NGO for abolition of the death penalty worldwide. Please welcome Ms. Zamparuti.
La parola tortura deriva dal latino tortus, torto, e a guardare, a sentire, a sapere quello che accade in Cina sull'espianto forzato di organi da detenuti per motivi religiosi, per appartenere a un gruppo etnico o linguistico, mi fa dire che la Cina è uno stato di torto, di tortura, non è uno stato di diritto. I diritti fondamentali, principi inviolabili come il diritto alla vita, alla integrità fisica, all'integrità mentale, alla libertà, sono sistematicamente violati da parte di questo regime autoritario, totalitario, da questo stato di torto. L'ingiustizia, l'illegalità, il torto, la tortura è diffusa in Cina e l'atrocità legata all'espianto forzato di organi è qualcosa di inaccettabile, di violentemente inimmaginabile, perché avviene su persone detenute, cioè su persone già private della loro libertà, che sono nelle mani di uno Stato che dovrebbe tutelarli e che invece al di là e oltre la loro volontà gli espianta organi vitali, e questo per giunta avviene su detenuti per motivi, l'ho detto, religiosi, quindi di coscienza, attiene alla loro modo d'essere, al loro modo di pensare, oppure perché appartengono a un gruppo etnico o linguistico. E il fatto poi che in questi espianti, in questa pratica violentemente inimmaginabile, perché avviene su persone detenute, cioè su persone già private della loro libertà, che sono nelle mani di uno Stato che dovrebbe tutelarli e che invece al di là e oltre la loro volontà gli espianta organi vitali, e questo per giunta avviene su detenuti per motivi, l'ho detto, religiosi, quindi di coscienza, attiene alla loro modo d'essere, al loro modo di pensare, oppure perché appartengono a un gruppo etnico o linguistico. E il fatto poi che in questi espianti, in questa pratica che ha una dimensione, io la definisco industriale, perché è sistematica, è diffusa e avviene anche per motivi di lucro. Sapere che personale sanitario, parliamo di medici, parliamo di chirurghi, parliamo di anestesisti, parliamo di infermieri, cioè di persone che dovrebbero avere a cuore il benessere degli esseri umani e invece diventano parte di questa macchina infernale, di questa macchina disumana, deve davvero farci riflettere da un lato, ma deve anche farci vergognare come esseri umani, sapere che qualche cosa di simile avviene in un paese, la Cina, con cui ci sono relazioni sempre più strette, sempre più consolidate. Occorre che la comunità internazionale, ma non solo la comunità internazionale, intervengano. Certo, ci vengono in aiuto gli interventi degli special rapporteur delle Nazioni Unite, in particolare è importante che siano intervenuti gli special rapporteur sulla tortura, l'attuale e anche il precedente, e come anche il fatto che un tribunale, il tribunale sulla Cina, che è stato guidato dal ex procuratore del tribunale penale contro i crimini contro l'umanità commessi nell'ex Jugoslavia, siano intervenuti definendo questa pratica dell'espianto forzato di organi in Cina come un crimine contro l'umanità. Credo che questa sia davvero la definizione più appropriata per questa pratica così diffusa e così inaccettabile. Sono intervenuti più volte perché hanno acquisito la documentazione relativa al fatto che proprio questo tipo di prigionieri vengono forzati a fare degli esami del sangue o di altri organi, che poi tutti questi dati vengono inseriti in una banca dati per facilitare poi il collocamento degli organi espiantati, e parliamo di espianti di cuore, di cornee, in alcuni casi anche del fegato, con poi i parenti i familiari dei detenuti a cui sono stati espiantati gli organi non hanno neanche la possibilità, non hanno neanche il diritto di poter avere i corpi dei propri cari. Ora, questo è uno scenario davvero infernale che ci deve portare a una mobilitazione come organizzazioni impegnati per la tutela dei diritti umani, come individui e come anche istituzioni. Io penso che ci debba essere davvero un appello rivolto a tutti, ai cittadini, ma anche agli organismi sovranazionali. Dicevo, sono intervenute le Nazioni Unite, ma bisogna rivolgersi anche all'Organizzazione Mondiale per la Sanità, al Consiglio d'Europa, al Parlamento Europeo, a tutti quegli organismi che possono intervenire e che possono soprattutto dare indicazioni perché non si collabori con la Cina, non ci sia la minima collaborazione con personale sanitario o comunque che questo problema enorme, immane, sia posto come un problema prioritario in ogni interlocuzione in sede bilaterale o multilaterale col regime cinese, perché di fronte a questa davvero vergogna dell'umanità noi dobbiamo anche chiederci che cosa possiamo fare per cambiare lo stato delle cose. Io sono un esponente anche dell'associazione Nessuno Tocchi Caino, che ha condotto non solo una battaglia accanto del Falun Gong, ma anche una battaglia a livello internazionale contro la pena di morte. Siamo riusciti ad ottenere dall'Assemblea Generale delle Nazioni Unite la proclamazione di una moratoria universale delle esecuzioni capitali. La Cina ha cercato, alla luce di questa presa di posizione, anche di contenere il ricorso alla pena di morte. Certo, continuano queste pratiche di pene di morte nascoste, come l'espianto di organi su detenuti, e nel chiederci che cosa possiamo fare, io credo che sia importante estendere la consapevolezza nell'opinione pubblica mondiale di questa crimine contro l'umanità e operare per elevare la coscienza nostra e aiutare anche la Cina ad elevare, e mi riferisco al regime cinese, a cambiare, a elevare la sua coscienza. Serve un monitoraggio, serve sapere, serve conoscere, serve poter vedere e quindi insistere perché il regime cinese permetta anche un'indagine internazionale su questo crimine contro l'umanità, permetta a osservatori internazionali di andare in Cina a verificare quello che sta succedendo. Occorre poi far conoscere, perché per estendere la consapevolezza e aumentare ed elevare la coscienza serve conoscenza. Noi sappiamo come in fondo anche appelli internazionali abbiano contribuito a quantomeno far sì che la Cina nel 2015 introducesse una nuova normativa tale per cui la possibilità di mettere a disposizione organi espiantati avvenga solo in strutture ospedaliere e da parte di chi ha dato un consenso volontario a che questo avvenga. Sappiamo che non è solo in questo ambito che l'espianto di organi avviene, perché sappiamo che continuano gli espianti anche nei confronti di detenuti, e mi ha sconvolto sapere e leggere le notizie come l'espianto avvenga anche su detenuti ancora vivi, in particolare quando sono detenuti legati al movimento spirituale del Falun Gong. Quindi occorre che tutto questo sia conosciuto, ma io credo alla fine che quello su cui occorre fare leva siano proprio quei principi che pratica il Falun Gong. Mi riferisco alla verità, alla compassione e alla tolleranza. Noi nell'affrontare questa battaglia dobbiamo proprio incarnare questi principi: verità, compassione e tolleranza. Di questo noi dobbiamo farci forti. Nessuno tocchicaino ha aggiunto un'altra denominazione, spes contra spam. È un riferimento non violento, è un riferimento alla lettera di San Paolo ai Romani che disse che proprio quando tutto sembra disperato, impossibile, proprio in quel momento bisogna incarnare quella speranza che vogliamo vedere realizzata nel mondo. Quindi noi la Cina la dobbiamo cambiare, la possiamo cambiare, possiamo farlo se innanzitutto noi pratichiamo quello che il regime cinese vuole cancellare: la verità, la compassione e la tolleranza. È per questo che tratta nel modo che sappiamo anche quei praticanti del Falun Gong che ingiustamente vengono detenuti e che in maniera vergognosa vengono anche uccisi in ragione dell'espianto degli organi vitali. Quindi io ringrazio voi per quello che fate, sono a disposizione, come sempre lo sono stata, da militante dei diritti umani e da persona impegnata contro la tortura, i trattamenti inumani e degradanti, a fare esattamente questo, a estendere la consapevolezza per elevare la coscienza in nome dei principi di verità, di compassione e di tolleranza.
And thank you, Ms. Amparuti, for highlighting the importance of the universal values that all humanity can cherish and respect. Next, we welcome Krzysztof Leżinski. He is a Polish political and human rights activist denouncing fascism and communism. Since the 1960s, he was a leader in the Solidarity movement in Poland, for which he spent 15 years in prison. He is a noted journalist, chief editor, photographer, author, and alpinist. Mr. Leżinski is a voice that shows courage in the face of oppressive regimes, one who is not afraid to speak up for justice.
Problem, o którym rozmawiamy, to jest problem obojętności, braku reakcji ze strony dużej bardzo części ludzi Zachodu, przede wszystkim polityków, biznesmenów, celebrytów, naukowców, ale również zwykłych ludzi. Oczywiście jest pewna braku reakcji na zbrodnie reżimu chińskiego. Oczywiście jest pewna ilość ludzi cynicznych, którzy wiedząc o nich będą się zachowywać obojętnie albo wręcz to popierać, ale nie mówmy o nich, bo to jest niewielka część. Na świecie jest bardzo dużo ludzi, którzy by się angażowali w obronę praw człowieka i w reakcję na takie postępowania, gdyby o nich wiedzieli, gdyby mieli o nich rzetelną wiedzę. Czasem wiedza większości ludzi Zachodu jest żadna, albo jest wręcz fałszywa, albo znikoma. Nasz cały system edukacji, przede wszystkim historycznej, ale i politycznej, skoncentrowany jest na sprawach naszej cywilizacji, na historii naszej cywilizacji i przede wszystkim tego się uczymy w szkole, tego się uczymy na uczelniach. Natomiast o dwudziestowiecznej historii Chin nie wiemy prawie nic. I to nie jest tylko wynik wieloletniej izolacji tego kraju, to jest wynik obojętności. To jest problem, który trzeba przełamać. Jeżeli sobie przypomnimy słynną wypowiedź Shirley MacLaine, że najlepsze, co się przytrafiło Chinom, to rządy Mao, to zapytajmy, jaką wiedzę miała Shirley MacLaine na temat Chin? No żadną albo fałszywą. Dla nas może być szokiem, że podanie jako wielkiego szczęścia są rządy największego zbrodniarza w historii świata. Ale no, tak to wyszło. Co z tym trzeba zrobić? Trzeba przede wszystkim edukować. Przede wszystkim edukować tych, którzy odpowiadają za przekazywanie wiedzy społeczeństwu, czyli dziennikarzy. To dziennikarze piszą artykuły, to dziennikarze występują w telewizji i jeżeli oni wiedzą, to przekazują wiedzę prawdziwą. Jeżeli nie wiedzą, to nie przekazują żadnej albo fałszywą. Co jest ważne, to jest to, że ludzie żyjący w krajach demokratycznych, wolnych, praworządnych, żyjący od dziecka w takich krajach, nie rozumieją natury dyktatur, nie rozumieją zjawisk, które się dzieją w dyktaturach. Nie rozumieją tego, jak groźne dla wszystkich jest to, że dyktator wszystko może, że nie ma żadnych ograniczeń, żadnych hamulców, żadnych instytucji, które by go powstrzymywały. On nawet nie ma doradców, bo on ma klakierów. Tam działa tak zwane sprzężenie zwrotne dodatnie, to znaczy dyktator coś robi i od klakierów dostaje informację, że robi bardzo dobrze. Więc nawet jak robi coś bardzo złego, to dostaje informację, że robi bardzo dobrze. No to jak robię bardzo dobrze, to jeszcze bardziej będę to robił. To jest dokładnie odwrotnie niż w demokracjach. W demokracji, gdzie jest wolna prasa, gdzie są wolne media, jeżeli rządzący robią coś źle, to natychmiast jest alarm w mediach. Natychmiast alarm ze strony społeczeństwa, że robią źle. W dyktaturze jest odwrotnie. Największym kłamstwem dyktatury, powszechnie występującym we wszystkich dyktaturach, jest takie hasło, że niewinni nie mają czego się bać. Nieprawda. Na kaprysach dyktatorów cierpią właśnie ci głównie niewinni. I tutaj takim przykładem właśnie z rządów Mao Tse-tunga jest kampania Tygrys robi wielki skok naprzód, czyli tak zwana kampania wielkiego skoku. Kiedy Mao doprowadził do śmierci głodowej co najmniej 45 milionów ludzi w ciągu 3 lat, co najmniej, bo tyle jest udowodnione na podstawie już jawnych dokumentów, a prawdopodobnie było tego dużo więcej. Szacuje się tak, że politolodzy szacują, historycy, na 64 miliony. I z czego to wynikało? Z 2 rzeczy. Z centralizacji i z kolektywizacji. Czy on chciał zagłodzić swój własny naród? Nie. On chciał prześcignąć Anglię w produkcji stali. On chciał w krótkim czasie zbudować potężną gospodarkę, co było kompletnie niemożliwe. A działało to w ten sposób, że każda prowincja, każdy powiat musiał się wykazywać sukcesami. Każdy urzędnik musiał się wykazywać sukcesami. Jak się nie wykazywał sukcesami, to szedł pod ściankę. Był skracany o głowę. Więc wszyscy zawyżali sprawozdania, zawyżali wysokość plonów, a centrala na tej podstawie ustalała dostawy obowiązkowe i zabierała całą żywność ze wsi. Bardzo proste. To jest właśnie przykład tego, że ci niewinni mogą najwięcej właśnie stracić. Takich przykładów można by więcej. Dlaczego dzieje się tak straszna rzecz jak grabież organów w Chinach? Głównie od ludzi ze środowiska Falun Gong, gdzie są po prostu prywatne osoby nie zajmujące się żadną polityką, zwyczajnie wyłapywane, zwyczajnie mordowane po to, bo że czyjaś nerka czy serce się może komuś przydać, no, można sprzedać. Otóż dyktatura nie traktuje ludzi jako obywateli, tylko jako narzędzia. Człowiek jest dla dyktatury narzędziem do realizacji jej celów. nie ma praw obywatelskich, nie ma praw człowieka. Człowiek jest elementem masy. W systemie komunistycznym mówi się o masach, a nie o ludziach. I dlatego tego człowieka można tak traktować. I tu mamy, przypomnijmy takie słynne powiedzenie Stalina. Ludzi u nas mnogo. No co, że tam ludzie giną? A ludzi u nas dużo. Prawda? Więc ludzie są zasobem dla dyktatury. Teraz wobec takich zbrodni są możliwe różne postawy. Można przyjąć postawę: a moja chata z kraja, ja się tym nie zajmuję, mnie to nie interesuje, ja sobie żyję spokojnie na uboczu, mnie to nie dotyczy. Można przyjąć postawę ucieczki. Ja uciekam z tego kraju, prawda, albo uciekam gdzieś na odludzie, albo uciekam gdzieś, chowam się i tak dalej. A można przyjąć postawę walki. Postawa walki jest trudna, bo wymaga wyrzeczeń, bo się narażam na represje najróżniejsze, czasami nawet bardzo groźne. Tylko teraz ja bym zadał pytanie takie ludziom z wolnych krajów. Fajnie, no żyjemy w demokracji, wybieramy sobie swoje władze, żyjemy w dobrobycie, żyjemy w wolności słowa, możemy mówić co chcemy, możemy podróżować gdzie chcemy, możemy nawet sport uprawiać jaki chcemy, co w dyktaturze niekoniecznie jest możliwe. Pamiętamy, że w NRD wyznaczano ludziom, uczniom już w szkole, co mają trenować, nie? Nie mogli sobie wybierać. No, a kto to wszystko wywalczył? Czy ci, co uciekli? Czy ci, co schowali się w prywatność? Nie. Ci niepokorni. Ci, którzy się narażali. To tym ludziom zawdzięczamy, tym narażającym się, zawdzięczamy się to, że my teraz możemy spokojnie żyć. I oczywiście to jest strasznie trudna postawa. Oczywiście. Oczywiście związana jest z kosztami nawet w życiu prywatnym, najróżniejszymi. I tylko ktoś, kto przez to wszystko przeszedł, wie, jak dużymi kosztami. Ale z drugiej strony, kto pcha świat do przodu? No ci niepokorni pchają świat do przodu. Ci niepokorni, ci, co postępują inaczej niż wszyscy. Ludzie postępujący tak samo jak wszyscy nie stworzyli jeszcze nigdy niczego nowego. To trzeba o tym pamiętać. Ja bym tu na koniec trochę przerobił powiedzenie Władysława Bartoszewskiego, bardzo mądre zresztą, że warto być przyzwoitym. Ja bym powiedział, warto być niepokornym. Dziękuję.
Thank you, Mr. Lezinski, for such a stark reminder of what dictatorships can do to their own people, and also for reminding that it takes courage to make a difference. Next, we have with us Thomas Roden, joining us from Denmark. Mr. Roden is a political science student at the University of Copenhagen. He is known for his humanitarian and advocacy work in supporting Hong Kong democratic dissidents and combating human rights violations in China. He is the chair of the Danish China Critical Society. Mr. Roden is an inspiration for the younger generation of policymakers and provides a fresh view for building relationships with the Chinese regime.
In the greater area of Copenhagen, where I'm running for council, we have a friendship agreement with China. And I think that's a bit hypocritical, because we are also a region that is promoting UN development goals a lot and always trying to do what is best in this world. But I think you can't, on the one hand, always working for making this world better, doing what is right and doing what is going to put the world in a better direction, and then, on the other hand, have a friendship agreement with China and pillow talking with the regime about the friendship and how great it is and what you're going to do together to make this world better. Because the Chinese regime is not doing this world better, it's doing evil things to this world. Therefore, the first proposal I'm going to put off, if I'm elected to the Regional Council in Great Area of Copenhagen, is to make sure that all friendship agreement with China will be deleted at the time. And I'm going to make sure that we are never going down that direction again. Because as a region that believes in human rights, that believe in development, that believe in equality for human beings, we can't be friends with a country where they are making a genocide against the Uyghurs, cracking down on Hong Kongers, and stealing organs from the Falun Gong. I do though have one positive thing to say here today, even though this is a very dark subject. I think that in my generations, new political waves are coming up, and I feel them. We don't just want to sell our products to China, if that means we can't tell the truth about what China is doing, and if that means we are selling out our own soul. Therefore, on a positive note, I think this world is going to move in a better direction, in a direction where especially European countries who have been falling behind will step up and say to the Chinese regime that we cannot accept the way you are behaving in this world. We can't accept the way you are destroying the global society, and we can't accept the way that you're treating your own people. I think this conference is very important because it's doing what the Chinese regime is fearing the most, is telling the truth. And the truth is a very, very, very powerful thing, because the truth is often what is taking regimes and pulling them down from their all might. Therefore, today, the last things that I want to say is, all my friends, please keep up standing up against the CCP, keep on telling the truth about how China is forcing Uyghurs to give their organs or stealing their organs, and how they are killing people to steal their organs and sell them on the market, and how this regime is destroying humanity by taking the dignity away from people. Because this is what the regime is fearing the most, that we will stand up every day and tell the truth about the horrible things that they are doing to this world. Thank you a lot for giving me the time to speak, and let's stay strong in the fight for freedom and human dignity. Nice talking to you.
And thank you, Mr. Roden, for such a resolute views on a way forward and such a positive outlook. Next with us, we have Deborah Holbrook from the US. Deborah Holbrook is a critical care nurse and subject expert for the US Departments of Justice and Defense on forensic nursing science. She founded the Forensic Nurse Examiner program that became a model for the United States. A fellow to the American Academy of Nursing, she is the recipient of numerous international awards. Please welcome Mrs. Holbrook.
Hello, and thank you for having me. I am a registered nurse dual board certified in forensic nursing, and a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing. Forensic nurses have a unique voice in supporting an international stance against forced organ harvesting. The practice of forced organ harvesting is a form of human trafficking in its most egregious form. And we, as forensic nurses, have not only the responsibility, but also the obligation to support all efforts to abolish these acts, no matter where they are being performed. Forced organ harvesting is not driven by physicians and nurses inspired by a passion to save lives, but it is solely driven by financial gain, and these are crimes against humanity. As nurses, we have taken a Hippocratic oath to practice our profession faithfully, to abstain from harmful and injurious acts, to maintain and elevate the standard of our profession, and to devote ourselves to the welfare of our patients. We stand as nurses and against nurses who choose to assist in forced organ harvesting procedures in any way. Nurses have power within our communities, even those communities where forced organ harvesting is illegal. In Baltimore, Maryland, I have assisted in the formation of bringing together more than 60 federal, state, and local agencies and partner organizations with 13 hospital systems to screen for victims of all forms of human trafficking. These stakeholders include the Office of the Attorney General, the United States Attorney's Office, Maryland State's Attorneys, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Homeland Security, and a host of state and local law enforcement agencies, physicians, nurses, advocates and community stakeholders, and elected officials and state and local government officials. We have designed partnerships creating awareness campaigns of human trafficking, have created a plan for rescue and relief of these victims with a central point of intake known as the Blue Dot system. We hold each other accountable in our screening of patients for trafficking crimes and provide a unified response against all forms of human trafficking. We have created and strengthened legislation that is trauma-informed and does not blame victims for trafficking crimes, but holds offenders accountable. I have worked to form a human trafficking medical subcommittee where we have broken down silos, joining 13 hospital systems, including Johns Hopkins, in creating screening policies and training for medical nursing and healthcare staff, embracing a Blue Dot response as a central point of intake to protect patients, and putting victim patients first over and above financial gain. We have added forced organ harvesting to the list of human trafficking crimes and created awareness in hospitals, including keeping a watchful eye out for patients who suddenly make plans to leave the waiting list for legally procured organ transplant to travel abroad. This potentially flags these patients as perpetuating this market of organ harvesting. We are looking for those healthcare providers who may be involved in arranging for these patients to leave the country for illegal harvesting, and will fight to support their prosecution. In numbers, nurses have the power as well as the moral and ethical obligation to hold each other accountable as healthcare providers, to educate our peers as well as our communities that forced organ harvesting must be abolished worldwide. As citizens of the world, we are all potential victims of this crime as we travel abroad to countries who have not made this practice illegal. No person has the authority to decide who is worthy of living and who is not worthy. The Academy of Forensic Nursing supports our mission of linking research to practice through scholarship, education, and service to those affected by and responding to trauma. The Academy is committed to legislation and practice worldwide that abolishes all forms of human trafficking, including forced organ harvesting, and builds partnerships to create a unified voice that advances human rights across the world. As not only nurses, but citizens of this world, we hold a moral and ethical obligation to protect people. If not kept in check and kept on the forefront of international awareness, forced organ harvesting will join other forms of human trafficking, such as sex and labor, in becoming a clandestine practice, even in countries where organ trafficking is not legalized, and all for the purpose of financial gain. Forensic nurses strongly believe that now is the time to align physicians, nurses, and all healthcare providers around the world to abolish forced organ harvesting. And it begins in our communities, in our hospitals, and in a united position that we will, as nurses and healthcare providers, hold each other accountable, that we will respect all lives and honor our respective Hippocratic oaths, and that we will educate our legislators and our world leaders to end all forms of human trafficking, including forced organ harvesting. Thank you for your commitment.
And thank you, Mrs. Holbrook, for your determination and all the amazing work that you do. And now we have with us Professor Curtis from the UK. Professor Curtis is an honorary professor at the UCL Genetics Institute in London. He currently works full-time in genetic research and identification of risk factors for mental illness. Former editor-in-chief of the Annals of Human Genetics, he declined journal submissions from China over concerns that mass DNA collection was being used to fuel human rights abuses, including forced organ harvesting. Acting on his personal conviction, he calls for more rigorous selection criteria for research journals and believes policymakers need to take action to regulate this area. Let's have a listen.
Hello. I carry out research in genetics at University College London in England, and I was also until recently the editor of a scientific journal in genetics called the Annals of Human Genetics. And I want to talk today particularly about a specific genetics aspect which I think is of concern in relation to forced organ harvesting. So what I want to say, I guess, is that we know that there are three things happening. We know that forced organ harvesting is occurring. We know that people are subject to arbitrary arrest, to detention, sometimes to disappearances, sometimes without any judicial process. And the third thing we know, and this is a more recent thing, is that there is mass genetic testing across whole populations, minority populations, particular regions, where what happens is that people are sometimes subjected to medical examinations. They provide blood samples, and one of the things that's done with these blood samples is that one can take DNA from them, and one can test people's DNA for various markers and variations in the DNA, so that we know that those three things are happening. What I specifically want to talk about today is what that allows the Chinese authorities to do if we know that those three things are happening. Now, one of the things that it's not clear what is being done with the DNA. Nobody's sort of said, it's not officially recognized. We know it's going on. The purpose is unclear. People have raised concerns about what it might be for, that it's to, and I won't go into all of those. But one of the things that you can do with DNA, and we do this in the West, is that you can identify somebody who would make a good donor for an organ transplant or a tissue transplant. In the West, this is done voluntarily. So we see an appeal that somebody needs a bone marrow donor. We're asked to give a blood sample from which our DNA will be extracted, and people can test whether or not we would be a good donor for that person who needs a bone marrow transplant. And if so, then we'll be contacted. We can volunteer, and we can donate. We can choose to donate, and the DNA. And we can donate. We can choose to donate, and the DNA that we've provided also gets put into a sort of repository, a library, and that means that if somebody comes along in the future, because we've consented to this, if somebody comes along in the future and needs a bone marrow transplant or whatever it is, then their blood sample can be checked against all the ones in the library, and a suitable donor can be found. We're very familiar with this. Now, what I want to say today is that we don't have evidence for it, but that could be happening in China now. And it's very hard to see why that would not be happening. Here you have a regime that is collecting samples from which they can get DNA from all these people. And we know that they have no compunction about arresting people, detaining people, and we know that they have no compunction about forced organ harvesting. And what I want to say is that brings what to me is a uniquely sort of terrible new dimension to this process. I remember when we used to be told that forced organ harvesting was happening to executed prisoners, and then it was to sort of convicted prisoners, and then it was to maybe prisoners who maybe hadn't even been convicted of anything, or people who've been detained for no reason whatsoever. So what this means that the Chinese authorities are now capable of doing is that if somebody needs a transplant, a bone marrow transplant, but it might be a heart or a kidney or a lung. If somebody needs a transplant, then what can happen now is that the authorities can go through the DNA banks that they've got, and they can identify a suitable donor. And that donor does not have to be a convicted prisoner. It doesn't have to be a prisoner. It doesn't have to be a detainee now, because it can be somebody just walking along the street, going to work, going to school, at home, and there could be a knock on the door. That person can be detained, taken from their home, taken from their workplace, never seen again, because they are a good match for somebody who needs an organ transplant. So in a way, what this has the potential for is to treat entire populations as kind of a human farm of potential organ donors. Now, as I say, we don't have evidence that is what's happening. We do have evidence that forced organ harvesting is happening. We do have evidence for arbitrary detention and people disappearing. And we do have evidence that there is this mass DNA collection going on. And for me, the question is, given this is possible, why on earth would the Chinese authorities not do that? Why would you not, if you are in power in China and you have a powerful party official who needs a kidney transplant, why would you not think, I know, let's get a match for them and find somebody out there, whether they're from Tibet or they're in prison or they're eager or whatever, find somebody who'd be a good donor for this important person who we put more value on. Why would they not be doing that? So really that's the main thing that I think I wanted to say today about what I'm concerned, and I think there's a sort of new genetics dimension to this problem. And that maybe brings us to something that we could be sort of doing about it, and in fact is the reason why I'm no longer the editor of the Annals of Human Genetics. And I think there is a way that we could seek to influence China's behavior. I think there are places where there are sensitivities and things that they care about. One of the things they care about is their sort of scientific recognition and the careers of their scientists. So my thinking is this: if the practices that I've described are going on, this does not only involve security services, police, soldiers, secret police, what have you. For this to work, you have to have doctors involved, you have to have scientists involved, you have to have genetic scientists involved, you have to have a lot of people. You cannot have one or two people. You have to have a whole network of professionals, scientific and medical professionals, who are complicit in this. You have to have the notion that although not every doctor, every scientist in China is aware that this is going on or thinks this is going on, in a way, there is no accountability. There's no profession. If somebody in Britain tried to do this kind of thing, the General Medical Council would be on something like a shot. They'd no longer be a doctor and they'd be in jail. In China, that isn't happening. People don't know what's going on. People have no mechanisms. And there is no mechanism to go up against the state and say that we have an ethical standard that we will uphold, that if that goes against what the state wants to do. So my view is that institutionally, that the scientific establishments in China and the medical establishments in China are involved in these processes. And as an editor, I was seeing submissions coming into my journal from scientists in China. I didn't know who they were. They'd done this study. They wanted to publish it in my journal. And I was feeling increasingly uncomfortable about this. Why should I trust that these scientists have carried out their research in an ethical way when I know that the scientific establishment, medical establishment, is willing to put up with practices such as this? And so what I thought we should raise as a question, and this is a question, it's a big step, it's not saying we should do this, but should we, as a medical and scientific profession, be having a more formal boycott of cooperation with China? And what that would mean for scientific journals is that we would not consider submissions coming out of China, coming from Chinese doctors, coming from Chinese scientists. We would be saying, look, your profession is complicit in these practices. It's not necessarily you personally, but we are not going to treat you as our colleagues. We are not going to say that we know that you follow the same ethical practices that we do, and we are not going to take your word for it that your science is ethically performed, and we are going to not publish your submissions in our journals. And the thing is that Chinese doctors and scientists really, really want to publish their submissions in Western journals. It's crucial for their careers. So this would be a big deal if the scientific establishments outside of China took this kind of approach. And it would, I think, accomplish two things. It would apply a sort of a general sort of pressure, but it would also feed information in. I don't believe that the individual scientists who are sending us these articles on other stuff, they don't know all this is going on. But if they get a rejection letter from an editor of a journal saying, we will not consider your submissions because of the egregious human rights abuses in China, then that gets back to them. And then on an individual level, then you can start to kind of raise the awareness maybe within the Chinese professionals as well. So really, those are the kind of things, two things I wanted to say today. One is that I'm concerned that this practice is going on, that mass collection of DNA allows the targeting of organ harvesting, not just of people already detained, but just people out in the street living in their homes. Thing number one. And thing number two, is it time for us in the West to think about more formal professional boycotts, especially among doctors and scientists, on the basis that the medical and scientific professions in China are implicated at an institutional level in these practices? So that's what I want to say. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Professor Curtis, for sharing your insights and raising such an important point with us today. And this, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of the formal presentations for today. Thank you to all our distinguished speakers and presenters. You all covered such vital points that all need to be part of this global conversation. Now, it is my honour and privilege to open our World Summit to the official launch of the Universal Declaration on Combating and Preventing Forced Organ Harvesting. The Declaration is an initiative by the 5 co-hosting NGOs to provide humankind with a solemn document to find a way out of the crime of forced organ harvesting. We would like to begin the ceremonial launch of the Declaration by presenting this brief trailer.
After World War II, humanity took a firm stand to protect the fundamental rights of all human beings. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that all human beings have the right to life, liberty, and security of person. But now an evil, unspeakable crime is hiding behind a noble profession devoted to saving lives. In China, innocent people are arbitrarily detained, tortured, and killed for their organs at an industrial scale. The Chinese regime has turned doctors into executioners, and this has been happening for decades now. We the people are determined to stop the most diabolical atrocity of this century: the forced organ harvesting from living people in China. Join those who have taken a righteous stance. Become a defender of human rights. Take a stand for humankind. Add your signature to the Universal Declaration on Combating and Preventing Forced Organ Harvesting.
Next, I would like to invite you to listen to the directors of the 5 co-hosting NGOs who will briefly talk about their motivation that led to the writing of the Universal Declaration.
My name is Thierry Val and I am the president of the NGO CAP Freedom of Conscience. For more than 20 years, we have been defending freedom of religions and conscience in the world. In 1999, we were alert and have been concerned ever since about the persecution of Falun Gong members. Forced organ harvesting is a crime of forcibly removing organs from non-consenting prisoners of conscience for the purpose of transplantation or other medical procedures, violates universal ethical values and moral principles of human life and dignity. This is why this World Congress is of paramount importance and concerns all actors in civil society, politics and medicine concerned with human values. The Universal Declaration on Preventing and Combating Forced Organ Harvesting will bring the international community together around a founding charter for the protection of human beings so that such crimes against human dignity cease. Your participation in this World Congress is important because together we can make a difference. Thank you.
Independent investigations and reports, as well as the objective review and judgment by the China Tribunal, have shown beyond reasonable doubt that the practice of state-sponsored forced organ harvesting from living people has occurred and continues to occur in China. Witness testimonies and phone interviews with medical personnel at Chinese hospitals are credible and show that the main victim group of these crimes are Falun Gong practitioners, who have been brutally persecuted by the Chinese government for over 2 decades. Although the evidence is irrefutable, one has to ask why the international community has not been able to stop these crimes against humanity. It is fair to say that hundreds of thousands of Falun Gong practitioners, likely many more, have been murdered for their organs in the past 2 decades. Yet it appears that the global community, by remaining silent, has not honored or abided by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I believe the Universal Declaration on Combating and Preventing Forced Organ Harvesting is needed for two major reasons. Firstly, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was written and adopted in the aftermath of the Holocaust to prevent further human rights abuses. However, the persecution and forced organ harvesting of the Falun Gong group are still occurring in China as we speak. Thus, the Universal Declaration on Combating and Preventing Forced Organ Harvesting is not only a step towards improving the human rights situation after the fact, but an initiative to stop these crimes while they are still occurring. Secondly, it appears that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights fails to capture the specific, unbelievable crime of forced organ harvesting from persecuted groups in China. We need a document that specifically addresses the abominable practice of forced organ harvesting. The murder of innocent people for the organs must not be perpetrated by the medical profession. For the reasons stated in the introduction to the Universal Declaration on Combating and Preventing Forced Organ Harvesting, we ask for your support by joining us in our efforts to end this derailment of medical ethics.
안녕하세요. 한국장기이식윤리협회 이승원 회장입니다. 전 세계는 2006년부터 중국에서 일어난 강제장기적출이라는 믿기지 않는 사건을 주목해 왔습니다. 안타깝게도 2000년부터 수많은 한국인이 중국에서 장기이식 수술을 받았습니다. 대부분 불법적인 경로를 통해 파룬 수련생을 비롯한 양심수의 목숨을 빼앗아 공급한 장기들입니다. 한국인이 중국의 불법 장기이식 산업의 최대 고객이라는 평가도 들립니다. 민주와 정의가 살아있는 한국이 이런 말을 듣는다는 것은 정말 수치스러운 일입니다. 여러 조사 보고서와 독립재판소의 판결을 통해 우리는 이 사건이 전대미문의 사악한 인권 탄압이라는 것을 알게 되었습니다. KAEOT는 중국의 강제장기적출 실상을 알리는 영화를 상영하고 포럼을 진행해 수천 명 이상이 참여했으며 수십만 명의 한국인이 지지 서명을 동참했습니다. KAEOT는 이미 지난해 한국 정부의 장기이식 범죄에 연루된 중국 의사들의 명단을 제출하고 이들이 한국에 입국해 활동하는 것을 금지시킬 것을 촉구한 바 있습니다. 그리고 이를 저지하기 위한 모든 결심과 행동은 인류 양심이 아직 살아있음을 보여주는 증거라 하고 생각합니다. 전 세계의 의료계, 법조계, 정치계, 그리고 시민사회에서 함께 나서서 바로잡아야 합니다. 전 세계의 전문가들이 제안한 강제장기적출 근절 및 방지를 위한 세계선언에 KAEOT는 전폭적인 지지와 동참을 약속합니다. 우리는 지구상에서 강제장기적출이 근절될 때까지 힘을 보탤 것입니다. 여러분의 많은 참여와 성원을 바랍니다.
As a medical doctor, we have found many patients back from mainland China after transplant surgery with medical problems and even psychological sufferings since 2006. After several years research, we revealed that there are more than 100 patients from Taiwan go to mainland China for organ transplant every year. And those organ sources are mainly from prisons of conscience. The most victims are Falun Gong practitioners. They are being killed for their organs by Chinese Communist Party. millions of people are still in danger. That's why we start our journey to raise the public awareness and lead the law amendment successfully passed in 2015. After that, we found the illegal overseas transplant numbers significantly decreased in Taiwan. However, the issue is globally. Patients are still continuing to go to mainland China for organ transplant worldwide and get involved in the crime against humanity. The fight has not come to the end. We are here, 2021 World Summit, with all our allies all together, to unify the power globally, to fight against the forced organ harvesting, especially what happened in mainland China. Now, we also announced the Universal Declaration of Combating and Preventing Forced Organ Harvesting. We need everyone's faith and strength all together. This is the most important turning point in mankind history.
「強制臓器摘出を阻止する戦いに関する世界宣言」の開幕おめでとうございます。移植ツーリズムを考える会代表の稲垣です。現在、国際社会は中共ウイルス感染拡大による被害に苦しんでいます。この感染拡大は中共の隠蔽体質によって起こされたことは疑いの余地はありません。しかし、この間にも中共は覇権主義を推し進めています。国際社会はこの状況下において覇権主義を進める中共を批判するとともに、中国の人権問題がクローズアップされてきています。中共の人権問題で最もひどい問題の一つに臓器狩りがあります。人類史上例を見ないこの蛮行によって中共と心情の合わない多くのファールンゴン学習者、ウイグル人などが犠牲となりました。この恐ろしい蛮行は一刻も早く停止させなければならないのです。今回の世界宣言によって国際社会が中共の臓器狩りという人類史上例を見ない蛮行とそれを容認する全体主義を推進する中共の恐ろしさに対して脳を突きつけることで一日も早く臓器狩りがなくなることを願っています。ありがとうございました。
Thank you for the 5 co-sponsoring NGOs announcing their support for the Universal Declaration to combat and prevent forced organ harvesting. Now, I would like to invite Professor Kaplan to announce the official launch of the declaration. Let's welcome back Professor Kaplan.
Hello, I'm Arthur Kaplan. I'm the head of the Division of Medical Ethics at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine, and I've been working for many, many years on issues surrounding transplantation, both procurement and allocation, both in the United States and overseas. And today I'm very proud to announce, endorse, and urge support for the Universal Declaration on Combating and Preventing Forced Organ Harvesting. This is a document that builds on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which recognizes the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family as the foundation, the fundamental foundation for freedom and justice and peace in the world. The Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Dignity of the Human Being with regard to the application of biology and medicine further cements this Universal Declaration I'm announcing to you today, and it has a protocol on human rights and biomedicine concerning transplantation of organs and tissues. So, building on those documents, the Universal Declaration on Combating and Preventing Forced Organ Harvesting says and does many things, but most importantly, in my view, it calls on all governments to combat and prevent forced organ harvesting by providing for the criminalization of certain acts and to facilitate both at the national and international levels the criminal prosecution of forced organ harvesting. What do we mean by certain acts? The Declaration means organ donation should always be donation. It should not be coerced. It should not be something that does not respect the choice of the individual. And it has to show fundamental respect in getting organs and tissues for transplant for the individual's welfare and well-being. If it's not doing that, it ought to be illegal. I think all governments, as the Declaration says, should take the necessary legislative measures to establish as criminal under their domestic laws the removal of human organs from living or deceased donors, especially when that removal is performed without the free, informed, and specific consent of the living donor or prior to their death by the deceased donor. It's time to reinforce basic decency and respect for persons in the field of transplantation everywhere in the world. It's time to ensure that forced organ harvesting that does not rely on phony consents or coerced consents comes to a halt. Nations engaged in such practices must be identified, called to account, held responsible, and even boycotted until transplantation is operating under a moral framework of free choice and respect. I think this declaration does it. I hope you'll support it, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Kaplan. What a historic moment, and it is so good to have your endorsement of this newly announced Universal Declaration. Finally, I would like to introduce Mrs. Teresa Chu, a renowned human rights lawyer from Taiwan. The 5 co-hosting NGOs have invited Mrs. Chu to be the chairperson of the steering committee of the Universal Declaration. Mrs. Chu will now elaborate more on the declaration itself.
The 5 NGOs from Europe, America, and Asia, who jointly initiated the Universal Declaration on Combating and Preventing Forced Organ Harvesting, officially issued today this declaration document to stop the most diabolical atrocity of the 21st century to the humanity. To realize and safeguard the inherent dignity and the inalienable rights of all members of the human family, we will do our utmost to implement what is stated in this declaration, including but not limited to, first, on the state level, promoting legislation against forced organ harvesting in each state, and promote coordination among judiciary, administration, and the legislation to jointly combating forced organ harvesting. Second, on the international level, promoting all states the connection, analysis, exchange relevant information regarding illegal organ procurement, and promote international cooperation on investigation into forced organ harvesting by the CCP. CCP's forced organ harvesting not only mainly victimize Falun Gong and certain ethnic minority groups, but also ravage the moral conscience and the dignity and the lives of human family. Please support the Universal Declaration on Combating and Preventing Forced Organ Harvesting and end the evil with us together. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa Chu, announcing and elaborating on the launched Universal Declaration to combat and prevent forced organ harvesting. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes our formal launch of the declaration. And in a moment, we will be transitioning to our Q&A session with our speakers from today's earlier presentations. The registered audience, we invite you to post questions. You will be able to see a chat button down the bottom right of your screens in order to pose the questions today. It is also time now to say farewell and thank you to our live stream audience who participated today. And please, if any of our live stream audience would like to join the Q&A session in a moment, you can still do so by registering on the website that you are seeing now on your screens. You can do it today. And I now welcome our speakers to join me live with your cameras on.